My name is Avery Carson, and I am 30 years old now, but this began when I was 18, standing in our front hallway with my backpack half-packed. My father, Richard Carson, blocked the door, his shoulders squared like a drill instructor, and his voice had that final practiced calm. He said I had brought shame into his house, and he said he was done cleaning up my mess. I did not even understand the charge until my sister Brielle Carson stepped forward with a small box in her hand. She looked almost bored, like she was showing him a broken remote, not rewriting my life. Richard opened the box and his face hardened, and the air in the house turned cold. My mother, Elaine Carson, stood near the kitchen, twisting a dish towel, eyes wet, lips pressed tight, saying nothing that mattered. I begged her to speak, but she stared at the floor as if silence could keep the peace. Brielle watched me the way you watch a stranger, and she did not flinch when I said she was lying. Richard told me to leave right then, and he said I could come back only after I proved I was clean and worthy and grateful. Outside it was mid-November, and the wind cut through my jacket, and the temperature sat around 26 degrees. I had $42, an old 2003 Honda Civic, and a phone that stayed quiet. I drove to a grocery store parking lot, curled in the driver's seat, and tried to sleep without running the engine. For 3 nights I woke up shaking, and every morning I washed my face in a restroom sink, then went to school and work like I still had a home. I told myself Richard would cool down, and Elaine would call, and Brielle would admit the truth. No call came. Years later, after I rebuilt everything, Richard found my name online and sent a message like time had been kind. He wanted a reunion and a clean story. He did not know I had proof, and I was done being quiet. I parked behind a grocery store and pulled my coat tight as the cold seeped in. I kept the engine off to save gas, and I listened to every sound outside. The first night felt unreal, like I would wake up and walk back inside. Morning came anyway, and my phone stayed silent, and my hands shook when I tried to text Elaine Carson. I washed my face in a restroom sink and stared at my reflection and barely recognized myself. I went to school, then to work, then back to that parking lot, like it was normal. By the second night, the fear changed shape, and it turned into numbness. I counted my money again and again, and I knew it would not last. I kept thinking about Brielle Carson and that small box, and how Richard Carson did not ask a single question. I remembered Elaine watching the floor, and I felt anger burn under the coal. On the third night, I woke up coughing, and my fingers were stiff. I drove to a gas station, bought a cheap coffee, and held the cup like it was heat itself. That morning, Madison Parker saw me in the school lot, and her face shifted, like she finally read the truth on mine. She asked where I had been sleeping, and I tried to laugh it off, but my voice cracked. Madison did not let it go, and she said she was coming with me after class. I told her no, but she followed anyway, and my Civic told on me. She opened the passenger door, saw the blanket, saw the backpack, and her eyes filled fast. She said I was going home with her, and she did not ask Richard for permission. When we reached her house, Susan Parker opened the door, took one look at me, and pulled me inside. She gave me soup, a warm towel, and a quiet room, and she did not demand my story first. Later, Susan sat across from me, steady and calm, and said I could stay, but I would follow rules, and I would plan my next steps. I nodded, because I had nothing left to bargain with, and because for the first time in days, I felt safe enough to breathe. Susan Parker did not ask me for a dramatic confession. She asked me to sit and eat and stop shaking. The house felt warm in a way mine never did, and I kept waiting for someone to change their mind. After dinner, Susan showed me a small room, clean sheets, and a lamp that actually worked. She said I could stay, but I had to live like someone rebuilding, not someone hiding. The rules were simple, and she spoke them slowly, like a checklist. I would be respectful, and I would tell the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. I would go to school, and I would keep my job, and I would save what I could. I would help with chores, and I would come home at a reasonable hour, because safety mattered. Susan said she was not replacing my parents, but she was not going to watch me drift either. I tried to apologize for being a burden, and she cut that off with one look. She told me the table was not a reward, it was a baseline, and everyone in her house had a seat. Madison Parker squeezed my hand under the table, and I realized I had forgotten what steady kindness felt like. Later that night, I called Elaine Carson, and my voice cracked the moment she answered. I told her where I was, and I asked why she let Richard Carson throw me out. Elaine cried quietly, and said she did not know what to do. She said Richard believed Brielle Carson, and he said I was lying, and she was afraid of making him angrier. I listened, and it hurt, because love without action sounded like an excuse. When I hung up, Susan was waiting in the hallway, like she had guessed how that call would go. She gave me a folder, and inside were job listings, school contacts, and a list of numbers for counseling and support. She said we would take this one day at a time, and we would make a plan. I went to bed that night, and I slept. Not because I felt safe with my family, but because I finally felt safe in a house. The next week moved like a blur, and I learned how fast a lie can travel. Richard Carson did not just throw me out, he erased me. And he did it with the confidence of a man who never doubts himself. Brielle Carson told people I had a problem, and she made it sound tragic and inevitable, like I was always headed for ruin. Within days, relatives stopped answering my messages, and even family friends looked away in public. At school, I caught whispers when I walked past lockers, and at work, a manager asked if I was still reliable. I tried to keep my head down and act normal, but my body stayed tense, like I was waiting for the next hit. Susan Parker helped me set up a routine, and she did not let me collapse into shame. She made me list every expense, every shift, every deadline. And she said stability was built in small steps. Madison Parker drove me to appointments, and she sat beside me when I filled out forms with shaking hands. I found out my health coverage was gone, and my savings were thinner than I admitted. I picked up extra hours, and I studied late, and I kept telling myself I only needed to survive this season. Still, at night, I replayed the hallway scene, and I kept hearing Richard say he was done. I called Elaine Carson again, and she sounded exhausted, like she had cried for days, then forced herself back into obedience. She said she missed me, and she said she prayed Richard would soften, but she also said I should apologize, just to calm him. That was when something in me shifted. I realized Elaine wanted peace more than truth, and Brielle wanted control more than family. I hung up, and Susan Parker did not ask for details. She just reminded me to keep moving forward. I did not feel brave, I felt cornered, but cornered people learn how to stand. That winter taught me how silence can spread, and how a lie becomes a family tradition. Brielle Carson posted a smiling holiday photo, just the three of them, matching sweaters, bright tree lights, and a caption about peace. The missing space where I should have been looked like it was part of the design. Natalie Reyes, a mutual friend from high school, called me after a party, and her voice sounded careful. She said Brielle had laughed and said the house was better without me. Calmer now, like I had been a storm they survived. When Natalie told me, I was sitting on the floor of my room at the Parker house, studying for my high school equivalency diploma. My hands went cold, but I did not cry the way I expected. I put the phone down, stared at the wall, and then I opened my book again. There was nothing else to do. Richard Carson had made his decision, and Elaine Carson had chosen quiet, and Brielle was already acting like she owned the story. So I decided I would own my next step. Madison Parker kept checking on me, bringing snacks, reminding me to sleep, making jokes when my face went blank. Susan Parker did not give me speeches. She gave me structure, and she treated my future like something practical, not a wish. Every day I studied. Every day I worked. Every day I tried to build proof that I was not what they called me. I learned that anger can be fuel, if you do not let it burn you down. And in the middle of that cold season, I stopped hoping they would correct the lie, and I started planning a life where their approval did not matter. 6 months after Richard Carson threw me out, I almost quit on myself. It was a Wednesday, and I had just finished a double, 8 hours behind a pharmacy counter, then 4 hours bussing tables at a diner on 5th Street. My back ached, my feet felt swollen, and my brain kept replaying that hallway like a loop. I sat in my old Civic in the Parker driveway, because I did not have the energy to walk inside. A thought slid in so quietly, it almost sounded reasonable. Maybe he was right. Maybe I am the problem. I do not know how long I sat there. Long enough for the windshield to fog. Long enough for my chest to feel tight. At some point, I dragged myself inside, but I did not make it to the room. I ended up on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, crying into a dish towel, trying to stay silent so no one would hear. Susan Parker found me near 2 in the morning. Hey! She did not hug me, and she did not promise it would be fine. She pulled out a chair, sat across from me, and waited until I could look at her. Then she said one sentence, calm and steady, like a diagnosis. If you believe what he said about you, then he wins, and he does not deserve to win. She did not raise her voice, but the words landed hard. Something inside me turned. Not dramatic, not sudden, just firm, like a key finally finding its groove. I wiped my face, took a breath, and stood up. The next day I went back to work and I opened my textbook again. The week after Susan Parker said that I filled out my application to a community college nursing program. I wrote the personal essay in one sitting, and I did not mention Richard Carson or Elaine Carson or Brielle Carson. I wrote one line that carried me forward. I want to care for people who have no one. The acceptance letter came on a Friday, and Susan stuck it on the refrigerator with a sunflower magnet. Madison Parker took a photo, like it was a graduation already. No one in my family called that year, or the next, or the next. In 4 years, not a single word from anyone who shared my last name. So I worked, and I studied, and I kept moving. Nursing school became years of too little sleep, too much coffee, and a kind of exhaustion that felt permanent. I worked 2 jobs the whole time, one at the pharmacy counter, one bussing tables, and I studied everywhere I could. Bus stops, break rooms, the laundromat on Parsons Avenue. Anywhere, life paused long enough for me to read. I made the dean's list again and again, not because I was smarter than everyone, but because I was terrified of becoming the person my father said I was. That fear was heavy, but it kept me upright. And slowly, without anyone in my old house noticing, I built a new life that could not be taken away with one accusation. By the time I finished nursing school, I felt older than my age, and tougher than I wanted to be. Susan Parker hugged me in the kitchen, and Madison Parker cried like it was her diploma too. I pinned my badge to my scrubs, and took my first job in a hospital emergency room, where the lights never softened, and the clock never cared. On my first night, I watched a man come in, shaking, because he had nowhere warm to sleep. I watched a woman beg the triage desk for help, while pretending she was fine. I kept thinking about that grocery store parking lot, and the way cold can steal your choices. After my shift, I sat in my Civic and let the silence settle. I did not call Richard Carson, and I did not call Elaine Carson. I had learned that news does not travel to people who do not want it. Still, sometimes a name would come up in my mind, like a bruise you touch by accident. Brielle Carson stayed a shadow in the background, a reminder that one small lie can change a whole life. I worked nights, weekends, and holidays because I wanted stability, and because I did not know how to rest. Susan kept me grounded with simple questions about food, sleep, and bills, like survival could be organized. Madison kept me human, dragging me outside, forcing laughter back into my face. In the emergency room, I learned to speak calmly when everything felt urgent. I learned to hold a hand without promising miracles. And when a veteran came in, exhausted and ashamed, I felt my purpose sharpen. I told myself, one day I will build something better than this hallway, better than that parking lot, better than the life Richard tried to erase. I met Dr. Ethan Caldwell during a chaotic shift when the waiting room overflowed and everyone was stretched thin. He was steady in a way I recognized. The kind of steadiness Susan Parker carried when she refused to let me fall apart. After the rush, he asked me why I worked like I was running from a fire. I tried to brush it off, but he watched me the way good mentors do, with patience and no pity. Over the next months, he pulled me into small lessons, how to prioritize, how to protect my mind, how to lead without becoming hard. One night, we talked about veterans and homelessness and the gaps people fall through. I told him about my goal, a free clinic for unhoused veterans, a place where they could be seen without judgment. He did not laugh, and he did not call it unrealistic. He asked what steps I had taken, and what credentials would help me do it right. That was the first time I heard the words nurse practitioner, spoken like a bridge, not a dream. I started taking prerequisite classes, then applying to programs while still working full-time. I studied in break rooms, and in my car, and at the Parker kitchen table. Susan kept a calendar on the wall, and Madison kept showing up with coffee and stubborn faith. I did not tell Richard Carson, and I did not tell Elaine Carson, because I had stopped trying to earn their attention. I built my life quietly, like a house with strong beams, because I knew what it felt like when one accusation can knock everything down. 12 years passed faster than I expected, and slower than I deserved. I became a nurse practitioner, and I helped launch a small outreach clinic connected to our hospital, focused on veterans who lived on the edge of survival. It was not the full dream yet, but it was real, and it was growing. One afternoon, a local reporter asked to interview me because the clinic had helped people who usually get ignored. I agreed because I wanted donations, volunteers, and attention for the mission, not for myself. The article came out online, with my name and my photo, and a story that made me sound brave. Susan Parker called it justice. Madison Parker called it a glow-up. I tried to laugh, but my stomach turned, because I knew what public stories can wake up. A few days later, I got a message from Richard Carson. He wrote like we were old friends, like time had been a misunderstanding. He said he was proud of me, and he said he always knew I would do something meaningful. He asked if we could talk, and he mentioned family, and forgiveness, and starting fresh. I stared at the screen, and my hands went cold, the same way they did in that parking lot years ago. I thought of Elaine Carson, quiet and pleading. I thought of Brielle Carson, calm in the hallway, watching me carry my life out the door. Richard wanted a reunion, but what he really wanted was a clean version of the past. He did not know I kept proof, and I had finally learned that truth does not need permission to speak. I did not answer Richard Carson right away because his words felt unreal. He wrote like we had simply lost touch, like 12 years were a small gap. He said he was proud, and he said he always believed in me, and he asked for a call. I stared at the screen, and my throat tightened because I remembered the night he did not ask a single question. I remembered the box in Brielle Carson's hand and the way he decided I was guilty. I could have ignored him, but silence was what protected their story, and I was tired of protecting it. I opened an old folder on my computer, one I had not touched in years. Inside was a scanned envelope, the one I mailed to my parents a few months after I was kicked out. I had written a short letter, calm and careful, begging for a conversation. It came back to me unopened, stamped return to sender, like I was not family anymore. I kept it because it was proof, and because part of me needed to see it when memory tried to soften the truth. Then I opened a second file, a set of messages Natalie Reyes sent me after a reunion party, back when everyone still believed Brielle. Natalie had been shaky and guilty, but she sent what she had, a screenshot where Brielle admitted she planted the evidence and said Richard would believe anything she put in his hands. I had read it so many times the words were burned into me. I sat at the Parker kitchen table, while Susan Parker washed dishes, and Madison Parker watched me like she could read the storm inside my head. Susan did not tell me what to do. She only asked one question. Are you answering to heal or to prove a point? I took a breath, and I understood the answer. I was replying to end the lie, and to set my boundary, and to stop the past from rewriting itself. I wrote back to Richard Carson, and I kept it simple because I did not owe him a speech. I told him I remembered everything, and I told him I did not disappear. I was pushed out. I said he could not claim pride now, after choosing to believe Brielle Carson without proof, and after leaving me to sleep in my car. My hands shook while I typed, but my mind was clear, because the truth is lighter than begging. I attached the scanned envelope, marked return to sender, and I attached the screenshot Natalie Reyes had shared, the one where Brielle admitted what she did. I did not add insults, and I did not threaten anyone. I only wrote that I was done carrying their story on my back, and that I would not meet until he faced the fact. I said I wished Elaine Carson peace, but peace was not the same as accountability. Then I hit send, and the moment it left my screen, my stomach dropped like I had stepped off a ledge. Madison Parker sat beside me, and she did not speak. She just stayed. Susan Parker made tea and set the mug in front of me, like it was a quiet signal. You did the hard thing. Now breathe. That night I barely slept, because part of me still expected punishment, even from a distance. In the morning I went to work, and I focused on my patients, but my phone felt heavy in my pocket. I knew that message would crack something open in that house, because lies survive on denial, and I had just delivered evidence. Whether Richard accepted it or not, the truth had finally entered the room, and it could not be shoved back into a box. The reply from Richard Carson came faster than I expected, and it was not warm. He wrote a few short lines, asking if the screenshot was real, asking where it came from, asking why I did this now. I did not answer again because the proof was already there, and he could sit with it. 2 days later, Elaine Carson called me, and her voice sounded different, thinner, like the floor under her finally cracked. She said Richard confronted Brielle Carson, and Brielle denied it at first. Then she blamed everyone. Then she said she did it because she was scared of losing attention. Elaine cried and said she never imagined Brielle could go that far, but she also admitted she had seen small signs, and she ignored them. Hearing that did not feel like victory. It felt like grief, slow and sour, for the years that could not be returned. After that call, cousins I had not heard from in a decade sent messages. some apologizing, some asking questions, some trying to justify why they believed Brielle. A few people acted like I should be grateful, like being proven right was a gift. I did not argue with them because I had learned that validation does not rebuild a life. Susan Parker reminded me to protect my peace, and Madison Parker reminded me I did not owe anyone closure. I told Elaine that I hoped she would get help, and I told her I loved her. But I did not promise a reunion. I said I needed time, and I needed boundaries, and I needed them to own what they did. Richard wanted a clean story, but clean stories are built on erasing pain. I had spent 12 years building a real life, with real work and real purpose. I was not going to hand that back, just because the truth finally became inconvenient for them. After Elaine Carson called, the messages kept coming, and each one felt like someone knocking on a door I no longer lived behind. An aunt wrote that she always wondered, but she did not want to get involved. A cousin said he was sorry, then asked if I could send the proof again because he wanted to show his wife. People treated my pain like a group chat update, something to review and react to, instead of a life that was broken. Richard Carson did not call me, not at first. He sent one more message that sounded like damage control, asking if we could talk privately, and saying the family should handle this in-house. That line made my stomach turn, because in-house was where the lie was born, and where it was protected. Susan Parker reminded me that I did not owe anyone immediate access to me, just because they finally felt uncomfortable. Madison Parker stayed close, watching my face, making sure I ate, and making sure I did not spiral into old fear. At work, I focused on my patients, but every time my phone buzzed, my body tensed. I realized I was still trained to expect punishment for speaking. That night, I typed one short reply to the relatives who kept pushing. I said I appreciated their messages, but I was not reopening the past for debate, and I was not offering personal meetings right now. I told them the truth was not a performance. It was a fact, and they could sit with it without me. Then I put my phone on silent, and I went back to the clinic budget notes, because saving people who are ignored was still my real work. A week later, Elaine Carson called again, and her voice sounded raw, like she had not slept. She said Richard Carson had been pacing, rereading the screenshot, staring at the returned letter, and asking how he missed it. She said he confronted Brielle Carson again, this time in front of her, and he did not let her escape with excuses. Brielle tried denial, then tears, then anger, and finally, she said she did it because she could, because Richard always believed her first. Elaine told me that line broke something in him, and I believed it. Richard built his whole identity on being right and being in control, and Brielle used that like a weapon. Elaine said Richard stopped speaking to Brielle for days. Then he exploded and called her names he never used before. Elaine sounded shocked by his rage, but I was not. I had seen that temper in the hallway, aimed at me with no mercy. Elaine asked if I would come home, just once, to talk, because everything was falling apart. I told her I was sorry they were hurting, but the collapse was not my fault. I said I would not walk back into that house until Richard owned what he did, and until Brielle took responsibility without blaming me. Elaine started crying, and she said she wished she had protected me. I told her I wished that too, and the words hurt, because wishing does not rebuild 12 years. After the call, I sat in my car, hands on the steering wheel, breathing slow, reminding myself that boundaries are not cruelty. They are how you survive people who only listen when the truth embarrasses them. Richard Carson finally called, and I let it go to voicemail because I needed control over the moment. He left a message that was stiff and careful, like he was trying to sound reasonable. He said he wanted to talk, and he said he did not know what to believe back then, and he said he was sorry for how things happened. He did not say the words "I threw you out," and he did not say I was wrong. He spoke like the past was weather, not choice. Susan Parker listened with me, and she did not tell me what to do. She only asked what I needed, not what he wanted. So I called Richard back later, from my apartment, with Madison Parker sitting nearby, just in case my voice failed. Richard started with pride and family, and the idea that we could fix this, but I cut in gently and said no. I said I was not calling to be folded back into a story that never held me. I said he made a decision when I was 18, and that decision had consequences. I told him that sleeping in my car for 3 nights was real, and being erased from the family was real. And those years did not disappear because he felt regret now. Richard went quiet, and I could hear him breathing, like he was trying to stay in control. He asked what I wanted. I said I wanted accountability, and I wanted him to stop pretending Elaine and Brielle were the only victims. I said I would not meet in person, not yet, and maybe not ever. I told him my life was built without him, and it would not be offered up as proof that he was still a good father. When the call ended, I felt shaky but lighter, because I finally spoke to him as an adult, not as a child begging to be believed. A few days after I spoke to Richard Carson, Brielle Carson tried to reach me through Madison Parker, like my friend was a safe hallway she could walk through. Madison told her no, and Brielle switched to sending polite messages, full of careful words and fake calm. She said she wanted closure, and she said she did not mean for things to go that far, and she said she was young and scared. I read the messages once. Then I stopped. Brielle had years to be scared and honest, but she chose to be clever instead. When I did not answer, she tried a different angle, and she wrote that I was being cruel, and that I was tearing the family apart. That line made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. Brielle still believed the world should bend around her comfort, and if it did not, she called it cruelty. Susan Parker reminded me that apologies that demand forgiveness are not apologies. They are pressure. I decided I would not argue with Brielle, because arguing would put me back in the role she assigned, the messy sister who must prove her worth. I wrote one short response, and only one. I told her the truth did not destroy the family. The lie did. I told her I would not meet, and I would not debate the past, and I would not carry her guilt. Then I blocked her number, and I went back to work because my life was not built for her comfort anymore. Elaine Carson called again, and this time she did not sound like she was asking for peace at any cost. She sounded tired and honest and angry in a quiet way. She said Richard Carson was not sleeping, and she said the house felt haunted by what they did not face. She admitted something I had waited years to hear, that she knew Brielle Carson had always played games. And she let it slide because it was easier than fighting. Elaine said she kept telling herself I would be fine, because I was strong, but strength was not supposed to be my punishment. I listened, and I felt 2 things at once, relief and grief. Relief because she finally named it, grief because naming it did not give me back the lost years. Elaine asked what I needed from her, not what Richard needed, and that was new. I told her I needed her to stop minimizing, and stop asking me to apologize, and stop treating my pain like a problem to smooth over. I told her I needed her to own her silence and to get help for herself, because fear had run her life for too long. Elaine cried, and she said she would try. I believed she meant it, but I also knew trying is not the same as change. When the call ended, I sat with Madison Parker and Susan Parker, and we talked about boundaries like they were tools, not walls. Susan said some people learn late, and some never learn. But either way, you still protect your life. In the weeks that followed, I kept getting invitations that sounded like traps wrapped in kindness. Richard Carson suggested lunch, then suggested dinner, then suggested a family meeting, like the right table could erase the past. Relatives sent messages about holidays and asked if I would show up because everyone missed me now. I noticed how quickly they moved from apology to expectation, like my forgiveness was the next item on their list. I did not give them what they wanted. I told Richard that accountability is not a conversation, it is a pattern. I told him I would not step into that house, and I would not sit across from Brielle Carson. And I would not pretend we were simply misunderstanding each other. I said if he wanted repair, he could start by telling the truth to everyone he lied to, and by accepting that I might still choose distance. Richard went quiet, and I could hear frustration under his breath, because control was still his language. After that call, I felt the old ache in my chest, but it did not own me. I went to the outreach clinic the next morning, and I sat with a veteran who had been sleeping outside, and I listened without judgment. When he asked how I stayed hopeful, I told him hope is not a feeling, it is a decision you practice. On the drive home, I looked at my old Civic still running, still stubborn, and I understood something simple. I survived because I stopped waiting for permission to live, and I stopped calling betrayal love. Richard Carson did not like losing control of the story, and I could hear it every time we spoke. He tried to sound calm, but calm was his mask, not his truth. When I told him I would not come to a family meeting, he snapped and said I was punishing everyone for one mistake. I said it was not one mistake. It was a chain of choices, and the chain lasted 12 years. Richard went quiet. Then he said I should be grateful I survived, as if surviving proved he did not do harm. That was when I understood. He wanted my success to erase his guilt. I told him my career did not cancel what he did, and my strength was not his proof of good parenting. He breathed hard into the phone, and I pictured him pacing, jaw tight, hands clenched, the same posture he used when I was 18. He said he did not know who I had become, and he said I was cold now. I answered that cold is what happens when you are pushed into winter and told it is your fault. After that call, I shook, not from fear, but from how familiar his anger felt. Susan Parker listened when I told her, and she said something simple. People who refuse to face harm will always call your boundary an attack. I wrote it down because it was true. I went to work, and I kept my focus. But I stopped hoping Richard would suddenly become gentle. Some people can learn, but they do not change because you want it. They change because they finally choose humility. While my family argued about pride and forgiveness, my real life kept moving, and my purpose stayed clear. The outreach clinic grew, and we began seeing more veterans, more people living in cars, more people who carried shame like a second skin. I kept thinking about that first week after I was kicked out, the way I moved through school and work pretending nothing was wrong. I recognized that same look in my patients, the practiced smile, the careful answers, the fear of being judged. Dr. Ethan Caldwell helped me apply for a grant, and he pushed me to think bigger, but also to build carefully so the work could last. Madison Parker volunteered on weekends, sorting supplies, making phone calls, treating every person like they mattered. Susan Parker showed up with food for the staff, and she never asked for credit. One night after a long shift, I stood outside the clinic, looking at the parking lot lights, and I felt a strange kind of peace. Richard Carson could keep arguing, Brielle Carson could keep blaming, but they could not touch this. This was mine. The lie had shaped my path, but it did not get to own my ending. I decided that my future would be measured by who I helped, not by who finally apologized. Elaine Carson asked if she could visit me. Alone. No Richard. No Brielle. I agreed to meet her in a public place, a quiet coffee shop near my apartment, because I still needed safety. When she walked in, she looked older than I remembered. Shoulders smaller, eyes tired, like she had carried a weight for too long. She started crying before she sat down, and she said she was sorry, and she said she failed me. I listened, and I believed she meant it, but my chest still hurt, because sorry does not return lost time. Elaine said she kept telling herself I was strong, and that I would land somewhere safe, and she used that belief to avoid facing Richard. She admitted she was afraid of him, and afraid of what would happen if she challenged Brielle. I told her I understood fear, but fear does not excuse abandonment. Elaine nodded, and she did not argue, and that mattered. She asked if I could forgive her. I told her forgiveness is not a switch. It is something that grows after consistent change. I said I needed her to stop asking me to fix the family, and to stop hoping I would come back and make things look normal. I told her I loved her. But love without protection is not enough. Elaine wiped her face and promised she would get counseling, and she would speak up even if it was late. I left that meeting feeling heavy and also clear. Some apologies open a door, but they do not force you to walk through it. A week after I met Elaine Carson, Brielle Carson tried again, and this time she aimed for my reputation. She sent a long message through a cousin, saying she wanted to heal, and she wanted peace, and she wanted to move forward. The words looked tearful, like she had practiced them. She said she was sorry for any misunderstanding, and she said everyone was young, and everyone made mistakes. That line told me everything, because she still refused to name what she did. She still wanted the lie to sound like confusion, not cruelty. I did not respond, and I did not debate her version of events. I had learned that some people apologize only to reopen a door they can control. Madison Parker reminded me that Brielle never asked how I survived. She only asked how she looked. Susan Parker told me to stay focused on my real life, because my peace was not negotiable. So I stayed quiet and I kept working. The outreach clinic needed supplies, and the veterans needed follow-ups, and the paperwork never stopped. When my phone buzzed with another family update, I put it down, and I washed my hands, and I returned to the exam room. I could not stop Brielle from performing regret, but I could stop giving her an audience. That night, I wrote one short note in my journal, and it felt like a promise. I do not have to return to prove if I deserved better. Richard Carson asked for another call, and I agreed, but only with boundaries. I told him we would speak for a limited time, and I would end it if he blamed me. When his voice came through, it sounded older and rougher, like the truth had aged him. He did not start with pride this time. He started with questions about the nights in my car, about how I ate, about where I went, and why no one helped. I answered plainly, and I did not soften it. I said, I slept in a grocery store lot because I had nowhere else. I said I washed up in public bathrooms, and I went to school anyway, because survival does not wait. Richard went silent, and I could hear him breathing, slow and heavy. Then he said he kept replaying the hallway, and he realized he never gave me a chance. He admitted he wanted to believe Brielle Carson, because it was easier, and because his pride needed a quick answer. That was the closest he had come to honesty. I told him honesty was the first step, not the finish. He asked if we could meet, and I said not yet. I said accountability means he tells the truth to the people he misled, and he stops asking me to carry the emotional labor. Richard did not like it, but he did not explode. He said he would try, and he sounded afraid, like he finally understood what he had lost. When we hung up, my hands still shook, but the shaking felt different. It felt like release, not panic. After that call, I spent a long evening at the clinic, filing notes, checking referrals and calling patients back. Dr. Ethan Caldwell stopped by my office and asked if I was sleeping because he could see the strain in my face. I told him the truth was loud lately, and family drama has a way of trying to hijack your focus. He nodded and reminded me that purpose needs protection, or it gets swallowed by noise. Madison Parker brought dinner in a paper bag, and she sat with me while I ate, talking about anything but the Carsons. Susan Parker texted a simple line, "Proud of you, keep your feet on the ground." I looked around the clinic, at the donated blankets, the clean socks, the small refrigerator for medications, and the worn chairs in the waiting area. None of it was perfect, but it was real, and it was mine. I thought about the 18-year-old girl in a freezing car, and I wished I could tell her one thing. You will find people who believe you, and you will learn to believe yourself. Richard Carson and Elaine Carson could change, or they could not. But my life was no longer built on their choices. That night I drove home in my old Honda Civic, still stubborn, still running, and I felt a quiet kind of pride. Not the pride that demands applause, but the pride that comes from surviving and building something useful out of what tried to break you. Elaine Carson asked if she could see me again, and this time I agreed to a short visit at the clinic during a quiet hour. I did not do it to comfort her. I did it to see if change was real. She walked in slowly, looking around at the blankets and supplies, like she was seeing the life I built for the first time. She tried to praise me, but her voice cracked, and the praise turned into grief. She said she never imagined I would be the one caring for strangers after her own house sent me away. I told her I did not do it to prove anything to the Carsons. I did it because I knew what it felt like to be unseen. Elaine nodded, and for once she did not argue, and she did not ask me to make it easier. She asked about Madison Parker and Susan Parker, and she thanked them because she finally understood what they gave me. When Elaine mentioned Richard Carson, her shoulders tightened. She said he wanted to come too, and he wanted to apologize in person. I told her no, not yet, and maybe not soon. I said I would not stand in front of him until his apology included the full truth, and until he stopped blaming time, stress, or confusion. Elaine, said Richard, had started telling relatives the truth, and some people were shocked, and some were angry, and some were ashamed. I listened, and I felt something quiet, not forgiveness, but a small easing, because accountability had finally reached outside their walls. Before Elaine left, she asked if I could ever come home for a holiday. I told her I did not know, because home is not a building, it is safety, and safety takes time to rebuild. She held my hand for a moment, then let go, and I was grateful she let go, because letting go was the first sign she was learning. When the door closed, I went back to my patients, and I reminded myself that reunion is not the goal. Peace is. After Elaine Carson left the clinic, I expected to feel lighter, but what I felt was tired. Not the tired that sleep fixes, the tired that comes from reopening a scar and realizing it still has nerves. Richard Carson sent another message that week, saying he respected my pace and he understood my boundaries. I read it twice because a part of me wanted to believe him, but I did not let hope run the show. Richard had spent years using control as love, and even his kindness could be a strategy if he did not change at the core. Brielle Carson stayed silent after I blocked her, but silence from her did not mean peace. It meant she was regrouping. I stopped checking family updates, and I stopped answering distant relatives who wanted gossip dressed as concern. Susan Parker told me I was doing the right thing because boundaries protect what you built. Madison Parker said something simpler. You do not have to bleed to prove you were hurt. I carried that line with me. At the outreach clinic, we had a new veteran start coming in, a man who could not hold eye contact because he assumed everyone would judge him. I sat with him, and I spoke slowly, and I did not rush him. When he finally looked up, he asked why I cared. I told him I care because I have been left out in the cold, and I remember what it does to you. On my drive home, the city lights blurred in the rain, and my old Honda Civic rattled like it always did. I realized the car was still my symbol, not of shame, but of survival. I was not the girl in the parking lot anymore, but I was still the person who refused to give up. Whatever the Carsons chose next, I would not hand them the power to rewrite my story. I would keep my work, my peace, and my future, and I would let the truth stand on its own. A few months passed, and the noise finally softened. Richard Carson stopped pushing for meetings, and when he did reach out, his words were slower, less polished, like he was learning to speak without controlling the outcome. Elaine Carson kept her promise to get help, and she began saying no to things she used to accept, even when it made the house tense. I did not celebrate that, but I noticed it, because change is rare, and it matters when it is real. Brielle Carson never offered a clean confession, and I stopped waiting for one. Some people do not apologize to heal. They apologize to manage their image, and Brielle still cared more about looking innocent than being honest. The outreach clinic grew, and we secured more funding, and we expanded our hours. Dr. Ethan Caldwell told me he was proud, and this time pride felt safe, because it did not come with strings. Madison Parker and Susan Parker stayed close, steady as always, the kind of family built by choice, not blood. One evening, after a long shift, I sat in my old Honda Civic and watched the clinic lights fade behind me. I thought about that first winter, and the grocery store lot, and the way I believed I was alone. I was not alone. I was just surrounded by the wrong people. The truth came late, but it came, and it did what truth always does. It broke the lie open, and it forced everyone to look. I did not get back the years I lost, and I did not need revenge to feel whole. I needed boundaries and purpose, and people who meant what they said. Richard Carson can live with what he chose, and Elaine Carson can live with what she allowed, and Brielle Carson can live with what she caused. I will live with what I built. And if anyone asks why I do not go back, I will say it plainly. I do not return to places that only value me. After the truth becomes inconvenient,